Breaking news this Wednesday night about the RCMP. The head of the force, Commissioner Brenda Lucki, reveals she's retiring. What's behind her departure? Incredible rescue. The family freed in Turkey after being trapped for more than a week. As Canadian doctors head to Syria to help exhausted colleagues there. The truth is out there. More detail on the U.S. tracking that Chinese spy balloon and the capability of having eyes in the sky. Plus, actor, model, and international sex symbol.
It's gone!
Remembering the fantastic voyage of Raquel Welch.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with news about the head of the RCMP. Brenda Lucki, who was appointed to the role in 2018, says she's leaving knowing that she did her best. Lucki was the first permanent female RCMP commissioner. She says her departure is a personal decision, but she has faced multiple challenges over the years and her appointment was not open-ended. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson is with me. Mercedes, Lucki says it was a difficult decision. Can you give us some context around her departure?
Well, I'm not sure how much of her decision it really was, Dawna. I've been speaking to senior federal government sources on the political and the national security side for weeks, and they had been telling me that the government was not planning to extend Brenda Lucki's mandate, and that is what would have had to happen in March when her 5-year term expires. They were not very happy with her performance over the years, and as we can remember, there have been a number of tragedies and questions about the RCMP's capabilities while she was in the commissioner's chair. Everything from that tragic mass shooting in Nova Scotia and how the RCMP responded to it and the lack of transparency to what I'm told was essentially the final breaking point with how the commissioner handled the convoy protest that was here in Ottawa. So the federal government had no intention of extending her, according to my sources. Brenda Lucki, though, still seeing this as a win. In her final statement, she says that as commissioner, I was asked to modernize and address the RCMP's internal challenges. This was a significant mandate, and with the support of my senior executive team and the commitment of all RCMP employees, we've accomplished a lot.
All right, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thank you. Well, there is still a limited amount of information being made public about the objects shot from the sky over Canadian and American airspace. But audio recordings have emerged of the U.S. fighter jet pilots before they shot down one of those objects over Lake Huron. It reveals they weren't sure what they were looking at. The origins of that object and 2 others remain a mystery, but there are reports American intelligence had eyes on the first balloon from the moment it was launched off the south coast of China. Mackenzie Gray reports.
Just moments before they took their shot over Lake Huron, U.S. fighter jet pilots said over cockpit audio that they were perplexed by what they saw.
I can see lines coming down below, but I can't see anything below it. Definitely smaller than a car.
That small size is making the recovery mission of the unidentified objects challenging. Ships and helicopters from the Canadian Coast Guard are combing Lake Huron, and in Yukon, the RCMP are searching a 3,000 square kilometer area, but in both cases, they might come up empty-handed.
Let's make sure we recover them if we can, because I think that's also a working assumption. There is a possibility that we won't be able to recover them given the remoteness, given the challenges, given the deterioration, etc.
But there was no challenge in recovering significant debris from the Chinese spy balloon off the coast of South Carolina. A balloon that the Americans are believed to have tracked all the way from an island off the south coast of China, across the Pacific to Guam, cruising over Hawaii, then drifting north up to Alaska.
It means the United States had absolutely no reason to question the fact that it was a Chinese surveillance balloon.
American officials insist the Chinese still had control of the balloon while it crossed over Canada and into the lower 48 states, information that would have been shared through NORAD.
They would be fully apprised of all of the information that was being gathered, the tracking, the whereabouts that would be shared with Canadian officials.
Subsequent tracking hasn't shown any similar objects in NORAD airspace.
I'm not aware of any additional objects that have been reported operating in the space in the last 48 hours.
Japan has now joined Canada and the U.S. in saying that Chinese spy balloons have entered into their territory, and that's led the Japanese military to say they'll change their rules to allow any future Chinese balloons to be shot down. Dawna?
Okay, Mackenzie Gray, thanks. And with me now is Scott Clancy, retired Major General with the Canadian Armed Forces and former Director of Operations at NORAD. Scott, can you help us understand this? If, as has been reported, U.S. intelligence watched the Chinese spy balloon as it launched near China's south coast and was monitoring it as it flew over Canada and the U.S., that suggests the U.S. is capable of having eyes on these high-altitude espionage balloons. How does that square with what we've heard about the difficulty of NORAD radar systems detecting them?
So I think that, especially with respect to the first balloon, it was very clear that those gaps that General Van Erck, the commander of NORAD, talked about and adjusting the filters had occurred before this high-level first Chinese balloon entered into NORAD airspace. So to me, it squares very well. I think it's also very telling that that same kind of information was not present for the follow-on 3 objects.
Sorry, what do you mean by the same information?
Well, so we did not get any information on the follow-on 3 objects. We don't know about their attribution or origins. And right now, the leading theory from the White House and the Pentagon is that these are of a commercial application. Not that I would speculate on that, but that there's a difference between the fact that the Americans knew about the first Chinese object versus the other 3, I think is telling.
I guess telling of what, though? That's what we're all trying to figure out.
Yeah, and I think that it's about answering those questions. Where did these last 3 objects come from and what were they about? I think the recovery operations are going to be essential at trying to ascertain exactly where these last 3 objects came from. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that the first balloon, significant intelligence gathering capabilities and significant intelligence gathering attribution to China versus the other 3, which are still in question.
Scott, do you think that had someone in Montana not spotted that original balloon that was shot down, eventually shot down, that we in the public, in the media, would never have known about the possibility, about the reality of surveillance balloons being overhead?
That's a distinct possibility. There's a couple of things that need to be demystified a little bit about that. The Chinese launched that balloon. We know now that the Americans and by extension NORAD knew about that. But that means the Chinese knew. Once it came into NORAD airspace and we were tracking it, they didn't know that we detected it. And until that picture was taken in Montana, it's a bit of a cat and mouse game so that you do not tip your hat as to the capabilities of the detection systems that actually defend the continent. Now, the next question is, would it have just, if not discovered by a civilian, floated through? I think that would have been an interesting case. Almost impossible to know whether or not they would have shot it down anyways and made it public, because there's some benefit to that in exposing the program, but also in demonstrating that China is not a straightforward actor. So, no, it is definitely a possibility, Dawna.
All right. Scott Clancy, thank you so much for speaking with us. To the escalating humanitarian crisis in Turkey and Syria now. The scale of the disaster is breathtaking. More than 41,000 people are now known to have died, and that will continue to rise. Incredibly, there are still a few survivors being found. After more than 9 days buried under debris in Turkey, a mother and her 2 children were brought out alive. One rescuer told a Turkish newspaper he held the mother's hand as she asked for water, asked what day it was, and asked about her 2 children. They were pulled safely out of the rubble too, carefully wrapped in blankets, put on IV drips, and rushed to the hospital. Some joy in a sea of sadness. The whole thing, though, overwhelming for everyone involved. Those fortunate enough to have survived still have a long road ahead, as Ross Lord reports.
With days about to turn into weeks, feel-good stories can't obscure the horrendous reality of a death toll that's still increasing. Millions of people left homeless, and a life and death struggle just to save survivors in the freezing cold. Medical teams are working for days on end without sleep to treat survivors. Doctors with experience in Syria, including some from Canada, are preparing to return so their exhausted colleagues can rest.
None has slept. So That's where the medical error it's an issue. It's a major issue. You have a surgeon who is operating for 20 hours. He needs to rest.
As the combined death toll in Turkey and Syria climbs past 40,000, connecting survivors with the life-sustaining supplies they need is a dysfunctional effort. The head of the White Helmets Rescue Group accuses the United Nations of failing Syria. This aid convoy is full of blankets, food, medical supplies, and tents. It was organized by Arab tribes, but other convoys have been turned back, including one sent by Kurdish-led authorities from eastern Syria last week, with both sides blaming each other. The UN World Food Program says its partners have provided ready-to-eat rations for roughly 45,000 people in northwest Syria, despite physical and political obstacles. Canadians who've lost family members are living a nightmare. Mohammed Azmal Niksad left Calgary to search for his family in the devastated Turkish city of Kahramanmaraş. He found the bodies of his mother and sister. 2 other siblings survived, both requiring amputation.
I was sleeping on the streets. It was very cold too. There's nothing. There's no place, no shelters. There were some schools. I walk into those schools, but there are some dead bodies. I can't sleep there.
Which makes heartwarming scenes more powerful. The 10-member Burnaby Urban Search and Rescue Team returning to British Columbia after flying to Turkey the day after the earthquakes.
Looking for viable victims and helping families reunite.
They helped save a woman who was trapped in rubble. Those who remain in the devastated zones are still looking for signs of hope 9 days after the earthquakes. Ross Lord, Global News.
People near Wellington, New Zealand were shaken by a magnitude 5.7 earthquake today. No damage has been reported, but the country is already dealing with widespread flooding and destruction caused by a cyclone, and rescue efforts are still underway to reach survivors. Here's what's left of Hawke's Bay in the country's northeast. The forecast calls for more rain in the days ahead, heightening concerns of even more flooding and landslides. January was already New Zealand's wettest month on record during a season that is typically the driest. A state of emergency is in place across the country. Anguish in an American courtroom. Coming out the outbursts and the emotion at the sentencing of a mass murderer. The man responsible for shooting and killing 10 black people in a racially motivated attack at a Buffalo, New York grocery store has been sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. And in the courtroom, families of the victims made it clear what they think of him.
I will hurt you so bad. You have made me sick. You got my family crying. I miss my sister every day. I live 3 doors down again.
There were powerful victim impact statements. And at one point, the anger boiled over. One man tried to rush towards the convicted killer. He had to be held back by the police. 19-year-old Peyton Gendron pleaded guilty to 25 counts, including first-degree murder and terrorism motivated by hate. The judge said he deserves no mercy. He did apologize for his crimes. He has yet to be tried on separate federal charges and could face the death penalty. NATO members in Brussels say they're committed to ramping up the production of artillery and munitions and conducting more training of Ukrainian troops. That is welcomed by Ukraine, but what it wants even more is firepower to defend against the latest Russian offensive. Crystal Gamansing reports.
8 Dutch fighter jets are now stationed in Poland for the next month, a protective measure after Dutch pilots escorted Russian aircraft out of what Poland calls its NATO area of responsibility. Protection is also why Ukraine is pushing for fighter jets from NATO, but defense ministers are holding their cards close.
Our goal is to make sure that we give Ukraine additional capabilities so that they can be not only be marginally successful, they can be decisive on the battlefield in their upcoming offensive.
American President Joe Biden said at the end of January his country would not give Ukraine F-16s, but many no's have turned to yeses. One military analyst and former Polish soldier says it's only a matter of time before jets are delivered.
The armed forces are composed of different way of fighting, and And planes are like the puzzles with the tanks and artillery and the infantry.
The more immediate puzzle piece, ammunition for Ukraine and NATO countries needing to replenish their own supplies.
This is now becoming a grinding war of attrition, and a war of attrition is a war of logistics.
Ukrainians know exactly the toll the war has taken and what could still occur.
They will start a real offensive campaign. Certainly they will use aircrafts from their side, trying to stop our defense forces, and they will dominate in the sky.
Ukraine's defense minister says he spoke with his counterparts who indicated they talk with their governments about what models would work best. But it's not just about military hardware, but maintenance and training. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
A surprise political announcement in Scotland today. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, who has spearheaded Scotland's independence movement for 8 years, announced she's stepping down.
And be in no doubt, this is really hard for me. My decision comes from a place of duty and of love. Tough love, perhaps, but love nevertheless for my party and above all for the country.
Sturgeon says it was the best job in the world, but that the nature of modern political discourse is more intense and brutal than in years gone by, and she says that's taken a toll on her. She intends to stay on until a successor is found. She has faced setbacks. The UK Supreme Court blocked her government's efforts to hold another independence referendum, and there's controversy over a double rapist being sent to a female jail after announcing she was a trans woman. Sturgeon is Scotland's longest-serving First Minister and the first woman to hold the position. Cutting ties, why some Caribbean countries are considering removing King Charles as head of state. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in the Bahamas tonight. On the agenda as he meets with 20 Caribbean leaders is climate change, infrastructure, and aid for Haiti, a country in crisis from escalating violence and political instability. Canada's appearance may seem apt given the region's historic ties with the Commonwealth and the British monarchy, but those are ties a growing number of countries are considering cutting. Turia Isri reports.
That King Charles III is now formally proclaimed sovereign of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Hip, hip, hip. Hooray!
Officially, the Bahamas is still in step with the British monarchy.
God save the King.
Unofficially, people on this small island nation are moving in a different direction.
I just think that Charles is tired, and well, he's got a lot of negativity.
King Charles is preparing for his coronation in May, but countries across the Caribbean are rethinking their royal ties.
It kind of begged the question, well, why are we still holding on?
The Bahamas only became independent 50 years ago and is pushing for slavery reparations from Britain.
Really perceiving ourselves as a truly sovereign nation and separate from these ties that once held us in bondage is something that we're going to have to really look at.
Barbados became the first Caribbean nation to leave the monarchy in 2021.
The creation of this republic offers a new beginning.
Charles, then Prince, was welcomed at that ceremony in his role as the head of the Commonwealth. But William and Kate's Royal Caribbean tour was much stormier. Their visit to Jamaica last year drew protests. Caribbeans are also closely watching the royal family drama involving Harry and Meghan. Of course, the late Queen remains beloved by many Bahamians. There is also the view the status quo has its benefits: easy diplomacy and natural trade ties.
If there's one thing that the Windsors have been able to do, it's survive.
But the Queen is a tough act to follow.
Charles certainly is facing an uphill battle. It's going to be really important for him to show that the monarchy is able to adapt faster than it did under his mother.
Ultimately, it could be up to the people of the Bahamas to decide. The Prime Minister has signaled a referendum is coming on whether to become a republic and leave ties to the monarchy behind. Dawna?
Turia Isri in the Bahamas. Thanks. A fantastic voyage. Next, remembering the life of American actress and model Raquel Welch. When Raquel Welch made her debut in the 1960s, her impact was almost instantaneous. The actress went on to become a leading sex symbol in Hollywood. She has died today at the age of 82. As Mike Armstrong reports, she's being remembered as an actress who portrayed strong female characters over her 50-year career.
In her big breakout role, Raquel Welch barely spoke. Her part in the 1966 film 1 Million Years BC was as a caveman. But it was the promotional pinup for the movie in a fur bikini that turned the single mother of two and former weather girl into an international star.
1 million years BC. Ta-da, right.
Yeah, you look like it was a celebrity based less on her roles than her features.
I was surprised you didn't introduce me as Raquel Welch and Here They Come. That's usually what I do.
Welch was frustrated often by the roles she was offered. In 1972, she created one for herself, producing and starring in Kansas City Bomber. She won a Golden Globe 2 years later for The Three Musketeers. Welch would go on to star in 30 films in a career that spanned more than 5 decades. But it wasn't always easy. There were the battles refusing to appear nude and rumors she was difficult. She sued one studio for defamation when she was fired from a movie. Welch ended up winning more than the movie made at the box office. She was known throughout her life as an iconic bombshell and the model of Marilyn Monroe. In fact, sharing some of the same frustrations with the Hollywood star system for not being able to do more. The title of her 2010 autobiography was Beyond the Cleavage.
Just the girl in that bikini, you know, she actually wrote a book.
According to her family, Raquel Welch died after a short illness. She was 82 years old.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Dawna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Abraham Lake in Clearwater County, Alberta. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.